comic book aficionado. And I was like, and then he said, well, Victor, his favorite comic book is Batman. And so we were just talking about that before we went live. So just go ahead and just kind of talk about how Batman became your comic book inspiration, because I think it's fascinating.
Sure. Well, I was a kid, grew up reading comic books, and to be honest with you, for a long time I didn't pay Batman any attention, probably because of the old TV series with Adam West. I thought it was just some type of kiddie fictional thing, you know what I'm saying? So I really thought that's what it was about, and how the Joker was just some guy cracking jokes and whatever. And then one day, I would say probably around the age of 13, I'm looking at this comic book rack and I see this comic book, and he has this different image. It looks very dark, very grim. And I took it off the rack. And then when I read it, I didn't realize, hey, he saw his parents get killed when he was 8 years old. They were shot and killed in front of him, bled out in front of him. And that drove him to becoming a vigilante. And so he decided that he didn't want to just figure out and hunt who did that, but all people that took people's lives. And it turned out to be very, very interesting, almost a psychological thriller. Like, I thought the Joker was just some guy that told jokes, but it turns out he was a psychotic serial killer. And of course, that they became probably the greatest hero villain thing known. Well, that was interesting, but little did I realize my life would take a twist that would be similar. That very same convenience store that I used to read that comic book at, a friend of mine was murdered behind it, disappeared. They didn't find my friend for a while. When they found the remains, mutilated, murdered, and it was quite an ordeal, because where I lived at, that kind of stuff didn't happen. There was a lot of fear in the community or whatever like that. There was a homicide detective that solved that case and was able to catch those people. And it was that moment, that was my so-called Batman moment. That was when I knew that was what I was going to do. And I wasn't, there's all type of cops, there's traffic cops, probation cops, but I wanted to be the cop that would go after the criminals for which there could be no restitution, the death of a human life. And I spent a significant amount of time as a homicide detective before I eventually became the sheriff of the county.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty cool story. Just looking at how as young kids we're influenced by even just the tiniest little thing as a comic book, and then that kind of forges us into who we become in the future. And and as a lot of people who know anything about Atlanta, that you were a longtime sheriff of Clayton County, and then we look into what are some of the issues that happen in Clayton County, and some of the issues that became a problem for you in Clayton County, because as we were talking, we realized that, hey, Eric and Victor Hill have a lot of things in common.
Yes, we do.
So it made me I'm like, wow, man, I have a lot of things that I can relate to Victor Hill with. And
yeah, you're my brother from another mother for sure.
I can handle that.
Yeah,
that's a good deal. I feel a lot better now.
Yeah,
but it's just it's just a thing. Like, when you're in the system long enough and you know who the players are, and not everybody's quite as honest as what they play themselves off to be, because there's a lot of politicians in law enforcement, and a lot of people don't understand how close-knit politics is to the badge. And unfortunately, it can destroy things. Politicians getting involved in law enforcement is always a bad idea. Now,
sure.
being the sheriff, that's a little bit different, because for you came up through the ranks. So you know how it is to be an officer. You know how it is to pull those long hours and to not sleep and to have issues in your personal life because of the stress and the overworking. And when you're surrounded by evil all the time, you start to absorb that evil. And so you have to be self-aware that, hey, man, I'm starting to go down a dark tunnel. I need to kind of step out and kind of reevaluate myself right now. So you've understood those things, so that becoming the sheriff and on the more political side is not as big of a deal for you because you've seen all the struggles that every officer goes through. But go ahead and just kind of tell everybody what happened in Clayton County as we, kind of, go into the criminal justice reform, which I think is going to be a huge issue moving forward in America in all counties, I think, and even into the higher courts. So if you could just go ahead and just kind of describe, some of the obstacles that you had to go through.
Yeah, of course. Well, lawfare is when the criminal justice system is used to target particular individuals. So you use the criminal justice system as a way to eliminate competition. Like, let's say, for instance, somebody's running for office and you think they can win. So, hey, I tell you what, how do we eliminate them? Well, I know what. We'll make them a convicted felon and send them to prison. That way they can't run. Or even if we just get the conviction, they can no longer run. And, a lot of people think lawfare is only done with politicians, but we've seen it done with celebrities, because sometimes it's done because people want to get 15 seconds of fame by saying who they prosecuted. But what a lot of people don't understand is it happens to the everyday man, and we'll get to that in a second too. But basically, to not be too long-winded, I was an outsider. Usually in certain circles, especially in sheriff's offices, usually a guy that becomes sheriff is a guy that's born and raised in the county. He's a person that maybe stayed in the sheriff's office for years. He got up to a certain rank. And then when that sheriff doesn't run anymore, people pretty much agree this is going to be who the sheriff is going to be. Well, that's not the case. I wasn't born and raised in Georgia even. I was born and raised in Charleston, South Carolina. When I relocated to Georgia, that's when I moved to Clayton County and got with Clayton County Police. So I wasn't in the political clique. I wasn't the person that the so-called political people who feel that they have the right to decide who's in office. I wasn't in that particular clique. And there's a group of people who feel that they make that decision. I was actually told when I ran for sheriff by a former commissioner, well, we'll decide who this next sheriff is going to be. And they had decided that. So when I ran, I didn't have permission. And then I didn't just run, I won.
Right.
So that was a whole big deal. Not only did I run, not only did I win, but I did what most sheriffs do and should do: remove that administration and put my own administration in. And that's a whole nother story in itself. Well, they realized that they weren't going to be able to win the election in a fair election. So that's when the lawfare started. When I first ran, they pretty much had a idea that I probably was going to win. So they changed the law about county employees running, basically saying that in order for me to run, I would have to quit my job. We had to fight that one.